Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The first sound wasn't a scream. It was the fragile tremor of a chandelier, crystal beads quivering as if they sensed the moment before it happened. Then came the voice. "Who the hell let you sit at this table?" Gasps rippled through the Ritz-Carlton ballroom as Eleanor Kingsbury, ice-blonde hair, white satin gown cutting sharp against her tan skin, rose halfway from her chair and stabbed her finger toward the woman sitting across from her. Naomi Carter didn't flinch. She simply lifted her gaze, slow and calm, the kind of calm that unnerves a room more than any raised voice. Her black dress caught the golden light like a blade sheathed in silk. Not a crease out of place. Not a breath wasted. She sat with the quiet posture of someone who had nothing to prove and everything under control. But Eleanor didn't see control. She saw offense. "You think you can just walk in here," she spat, "and sit among donors? Sit among us?" Her finger sliced the air again, trembling with outrage. At Naomi's shoulder, a young waiter froze in place, the handheld card reader still glowing in his hands. His face tightened, somewhere between confusion and dread. He knew the script of wealthy tempers, but this one felt different. Too loud. Too pointed. Too cruel. Around them, the ballroom tightened. Forks halted midair. Sparkling wine stilled. The orchestra, sensing a fracture in the room's temperature, softened into an uneasy hush. A woman at the neighboring table whispered, "Oh my God, is she serious?" Another replied, "She doesn't look like she belongs here." Their phones rose like a field of small black mirrors, hungry for drama. Naomi remained perfectly still. Eleanor leaned closer, her voice sharpened to a hiss that the entire table still heard. "Tell me right now, who invited you? Or did you mistake this for the staff section?" The young waiter behind Naomi swallowed. His fingers trembled around the machine. He opened his mouth, almost ready to step in, but Naomi tilted her head a fraction of an inch, a soft silent signal, "Don't." Her eyes shifted to Eleanor, dark, focused, unbothered. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Naomi. Eleanor laughed, a brittle, manic sound that clattered against the chandeliers. "Unbelievable. Someone call security." "This," she waved her hand dismissively, "person doesn't belong at a $25000 plate table." Naomi's fingertips brushed the edge of her water glass. A simple gesture. But the energy around her shifted, as if the air itself recognized her authority long before the humans in the room did. Richard Kingsbury, Eleanor's husband, finally glanced up from his wine, annoyed, impatient. "Eleanor, just have them remove her. We don't need a scene tonight." But they already had one. Naomi exhaled once, steady and quiet. A breath that felt like a countdown. Outside the circle of humiliation, something else was happening, something only the observant noticed. The waiter's eyes widened just slightly, with recognition. Not of fear. Not of class judgment. Recognition. But he said nothing. Eleanor planted her palm on the table and leaned in until her shadow cut across Naomi's shoulders. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you," she snapped. Naomi finally obliged. Her gaze lifted. Direct. Unshaken. A gaze that didn't rise, it descended. And in that instant, some part of the ballroom sensed it. The shift. The danger. The calm before a financial hurricane. Naomi's voice, when it came, was soft enough to force everyone to lean in. "Are you certain," she asked, "that this is how you want tonight to go?" The table went silent. Eleanor scoffed. "Oh, I'm very certain." Naomi nodded once, slow, deliberate. And that was when the room, though it didn't know it yet, crossed the invisible line between comfort and consequence. The silence that followed Eleanor's outburst didn't fade. It thickened. It wrapped itself around the Ritz ballroom like an invisible curtain, muting the chandeliers, swallowing the orchestra's trembling notes, turning the room into a stage with two women locked at the center, one standing, furious, the other seated, composed enough to frighten anyone paying attention. Naomi Carter finally shifted, not much, just a gentle adjustment of her posture, the kind that suggested balance, not retreat. The ebony fabric of her dress caught a line of gold from the chandelier, haloing her shoulders in a way that made the table's onlookers blink. They didn't know why the moment felt strange, they only felt that it did. Across from her, Eleanor Kingsbury scoffed loudly, mistaking the stillness for intimidation. "Unbelievable," she snapped, tossing her hair back. "We spend months curating this guest list, and somehow security lets," she stopped, letting implication do the work, "slip into the donor section. I won't allow it." The words landed like ice shards. Naomi's gaze drifted, not to Eleanor, not yet, but to the young waiter behind her. Eli stood frozen, shoulders tight, card reader flickering in his hands. He knew humiliation when he saw it. He saw it every time a wealthy guest talked down to the staff. But this was different. He recognized Naomi. Not as a guest. Not as a stranger. As the woman who had quietly funded his sister's scholarship through an anonymous foundation. He had never forgotten her face. Now he watched her endure something she didn't deserve. He opened his mouth, instinct tugging him forward. But Naomi's eyes met his. A razor-thin motion, barely a tilt of her head, told him not yet. Eli froze again, breath trapped in his throat. At the other end of the table, Richard Kingsbury adjusted his cufflinks with theatrical irritation. "Eleanor, enough. Let security handle it. We need to stay on schedule tonight." Schedule. A word that rippled with arrogance. He didn't look at Naomi. Not once. To him, she wasn't a threat, or a guest, or even a person, just an interruption during a high-stakes evening he believed he controlled. Naomi noted that. She noted everything. The guests around the table began whispering again, but quieter now, less amused, more uneasy. The shift was subtle, but it was there. Something about Naomi's silence unsettled them. People expect anger. They know how to react to it. Silence, on the other hand, makes them search for danger they can't see. One woman leaned toward her husband. "Why isn't she saying anything?" He swallowed. "Maybe she's scared." But Naomi wasn't scared. She was deciding. Eleanor misread the pause entirely. She pushed her chair back, heels clicking sharply against marble as she circled toward Naomi, each step fueled by the kind of entitlement that grows in rooms where no one has ever told you no. "Let me make this simple," Eleanor said, placing a manicured hand on the back of Naomi's chair. "You're going to stand up, thank this table for being patient, and move to the staff area where you belong. Do you understand?" The room inhaled sharply as if expecting Naomi to break. Instead, Naomi turned her head with the precision of a queen acknowledging a subject. Her voice was soft, dangerously so. "Is that truly," she murmured, "the assumption you want to stake your reputation on tonight?" Eleanor blinked, taken aback by the sharpness hidden in the velvet tone. Before she could respond, Naomi lifted her hand and brushed away a stray droplet of condensation on her glass, an unremarkable gesture, except for the way it stilled the entire table. Something was coming. They didn't know what. But the air did. And for the first time that night, Eleanor hesitated. Not because she understood the danger, but because she sensed deep in the bones arrogance often neglects that she had just provoked the wrong woman in the wrong room at the wrong moment. The chandelier above them flickered once. Then twice. As if the building itself braced for what would unfold next. A tremor of tension rippled beneath the chandeliers, felt, not heard. The kind of shift that happens when a room full of powerful people suddenly realizes they may be standing on the wrong side of a fault line. But the Kingsburys didn't feel it. Not yet. Eleanor straightened, mistaking the flicker of hesitation for victory. She smoothed the front of her white satin gown and lifted her chin, reveling in the small crowd that had begun to form, donors, socialites, executives orbiting her outrage like moths around a flame. This is what happens, Eleanor declared, when standards slip. When the Ritz lets just anyone wander into a gala. Her voice carried, sharp and shrill, bouncing off marble and metal like a thrown coin. To her left, Richard Kingsbury finally turned his full attention to Naomi. His expression was mild annoyance layered over exhaustion. He was a man who believed the night belonged to him and any disruption was a personal offense. He took a slow sip of wine, studying Naomi as if evaluating a malfunctioning appliance, not a person. It was only when his gaze drifted to her bare wrist, simple, elegant, unadorned, that his mind settled on a conclusion. "She's not a donor," he murmured to Eleanor. "She's no one. No one." The word skimmed across Naomi's composure like a dull blade, too blunt to wound, but sharp enough to leave a memory. The guests leaned in closer. Phones rose a little higher. And in the shadows behind Naomi, Eli, the young waiter, felt a heat in his chest, the kind that comes from anger you're not allowed to express. He had seen rich people be cruel. But this one was different. It had weight. Intent. Calculation. He glanced at Naomi again. Quiet. Perfectly still. But her eyes were doing math. Eleanor, gaining momentum, pressed on. "You must be confused," she said, crouching slightly so she could look down into Naomi's face. "This isn't a job fair. You don't get to play dress up and pretend you belong here." The table tensed. Someone whispered, "Is she really saying this out loud?" Another replied, "Old money never whispers." A brittle laugh cracked from Eleanor. Actually, she gestured around the polished table, dripping with silverware and power, "we're being generous. You're lucky we even addressed you." Then she waved her hand sharply, summoning a nearby security guard like one might summon a dog. "Remove her." The guard hesitated, glancing between Eleanor and Naomi. Something was wrong. He felt it. But he didn't know why. Naomi didn't move. Her fingers rested lightly on the stem of her glass, the picture of composed defiance. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, smooth, an instrument tuned to perfection. "You should be very careful," she said softly, "when deciding who you humiliate in public." Eleanor blinked, thrown by the gentleness. Richard rolled his eyes. "Threats now? Really?" But one person heard the warning for what it truly was, prophecy. Eli. He stepped back instinctively, as though preparing for a shift in gravity. And gravity shifted. Because while Eleanor continued ranting, and Richard muttered frustrations, and donors lifted their phones higher to capture a spectacle, Naomi Carter's backstory arrived quietly in the room. Not spoken aloud. Not revealed. Not yet. But the world outside this ballroom already knew her name. Helios Meridian Group. Fortune board member. Silent titan of infrastructure and technology. A woman whose signature alone could raise or bury companies. A woman whose anonymity was intentional, cultivated, purchased so that nights like these could happen before the reveal. Eli looked at her again. No anger. No fear. Just the quiet, terrifying certainty of someone deciding whether mercy was still an option. Naomi lifted her glass, letting the stem settle between her fingers. "I'll give you one chance," she said, "to reconsider your assumptions." But Eleanor laughed aloud, ringing sound that broke like cheap crystal. "Why on earth would I reconsider anything about you?" And just like that, the last thread of grace snapped. The room didn't know it yet. But the Kingsburys had just sealed the fate of their $7 billion empire with a sentence Eleanor delivered like a punchline. And Naomi Carter was finished offering chances. The tension in the ballroom didn't rise, it tightened, coiling inward like a wire pulled too far. What had begun as a scene was now something else entirely. Something dangerous. Something shifting beneath the marble floor, invisible but inevitable. Eleanor Kingsbury didn't feel it. Arrogance insulated her like a fur coat. She crossed her arms, tilting her chin at Naomi with the smug certainty of someone who had never been corrected in public. "You people really do love playing victim, don't you?" she said, voice laced with honeyed venom. A collective inhale rippled across the table. Phones rose higher. Naomi didn't blink. Her stillness measured, relentless, pressed on the room like a second atmosphere. It wasn't passive. It wasn't resignation. It was evaluation. Precision. A kind of inner quiet that signaled not surrender, but choice. Eli, the waiter, sensed it first. His pulse quickened. Not from fear, from recognition. He had seen expressions like Eleanor's too many times. But he had only ever seen a presence like Naomi's once, years ago, when a judge had handed down a ruling so calm and so final that the courtroom stopped breathing. "Ma'am," Eli whispered under his breath, unsure why he spoke at all. Naomi's eyes shifted toward him for just a fraction of a second, gentle, grounding, before returning to Eleanor. Richard exhaled sharply and slammed his palm onto the table. "Enough theatrics. I don't care who she thinks she is. Eleanor, call security again. Make sure they actually do their job this time." The guests around him exchanged uneasy glances. Something felt off. No one could name it yet, but the smartest among them sensed that Richard had just stepped onto the wrong side of a line he couldn't see. Eleanor, energized by her husband's support, leaned forward until her shadow swallowed the light across Naomi's arms. "You heard him," she snapped. "You're leaving. Now." Naomi lifted her chin a single inch. It was elegant. Minimal. And somehow more commanding than any outburst could be. "You've mistaken silence," she said softly, for submission. The sentence landed like a quiet detonation, no smoke, no flame, just irreversible consequence. A chill shivered through the chandelier's crystal strands. Eleanor scoffed. "Oh, please. What are you going to do? Post about it? Call a manager?" Naomi didn't move. Didn't blink. Her voice, when it came, felt like the low toll of a distant bell. "No," she murmured. "I'm deciding whether this deserves mercy." Richard laughed. A short, disbelieving huff. "Mercy? Lady, you're at our table. A man 2 seats down swallowed hard. Richard, maybe. But Richard waved him off. She's nobody. Let's not drag this out. Nobody. That word again. It echoed across Naomi's composure like a match struck too close to gasoline. A brief, razor-thin pause opened between them. The kind of pause that only becomes obvious in hindsight right before a fate turns, right before a dynasty begins to crumble under the weight of its own arrogance. Naomi finally set her water glass down, the soft click echoing far louder than it should have. Very well, she said, her tone slipping into something precise, surgical. If that is your choice, then let us proceed with clarity. The chandelier dimmed for a heartbeat as if responding to some unseen shift. Eleanor folded her arms. Proceed with what? Naomi stood. Slowly. Elegantly. But with a gravity that made several guests push their chairs back without realizing why. Eli stepped forward, instincts tripping alarms in his veins. Ms. Carter. Naomi didn't answer. Instead, she reached for her clutch, small, black, understated. Her fingers brushed the clasp with the deliberation of someone opening a sealed verdict. She lifted her phone. Not hurried. Not flustered. But with the calm certainty of a woman who had already chosen the ending to this night. Eleanor smirked, misreading everything. What now? Are you calling your supervisor? Naomi looked her dead in the eye. No, she said quietly. I'm calling yours. The room froze. The chandeliers stilled. And for the first time since the confrontation began, Eleanor's smile flickered, not fading, but cracking just enough for a thread of fear to slip through. And Naomi pressed the call button. The line connected before the room could take its next collective breath. A soft chime. A click of connection. Then a voice, steady, professional, filled the thin air between Naomi and the woman who had just sealed her own fate. Ms. Carter? This is Lillian from Executive Legal. We're standing by for your signal. Naomi didn't break eye contact with Eleanor as she lifted the phone slightly, letting the sound carry across the table. Gasps stirred. A few hands trembled. Someone lowered their champagne flute as if afraid the glass might shatter from the tension. Eleanor blinked, confusion dawning but not yet fear. Executive Legal? For what? She forced a scoff. You're making this more dramatic than it needs to be. Richard rolled his eyes. Just hang up and stop wasting everyone's time. But Naomi spoke first. Lillian, she said, voice razor clean, initiate the Kingsbury Protocol. The ballroom seemed to shrink. Lillian didn't ask for confirmation. Didn't hesitate. Understood, Ms. Carter. For the record, full termination? Full, Naomi replied. A murmur trembled through the nearest tables. A man whispered, full termination, of what? Another answered, a contract, maybe? A third swallowed hard. Or a company. Richard's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stood. What the hell does that mean? What Kingsbury Protocol? Finally, the first flicker of unease cracked through his mask. Naomi turned toward him, elegant and unhurried. It means, she said, the $7 billion transaction your company has been depending on no longer exists. The words hit the table like a blow. Someone gasped. Someone else knocked over a wineglass. A woman grabbed her husband's arm as though steadying herself against an earthquake. Richard's face drained so quickly the guests could almost hear the blood retreating. No. That deal is already in its final stage. The signing is scheduled for. It was, Naomi corrected softly. Until tonight. Eleanor laughed, high-pitched and cracking at the edges. You can't cancel a deal of that size over a misunderstanding. This is absurd. No, Naomi replied. This is accountability. Richard's voice rose, frantic now. You have no authority to terminate that deal. Naomi finally let the truth drop, clean and precise. I'm the counterparty. Silence detonated across the ballroom. Guests stared first at Naomi, then at Eleanor, then at Richard, waiting for comprehension to land like a falling stone. You, Richard's lips trembled. You're the Helios representative? Naomi's gaze held his, unmoving. I am Helios. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. The whispers started in a single corner, quiet, tremoring, then spread like wildfire. Helios Meridian. She's their CEO? No, impossible, she keeps her identity private. Oh God, look at Eleanor's face. And Eleanor's face was a masterpiece of unraveling pride. The color flooded out of her cheeks, leaving only shock and something uglier beneath it. This can't be, she looked around desperately. Someone tell her she can't do this. But she could. And everyone knew it. On the other end of the phone, Lillian's voice returned. Ms. Carter, legal confirms, termination notices have been issued. Asset reviews and credit recalls scheduled. The Kingsbury accounts are now frozen pending dissolution. Eleanor swayed. Richard gripped the table. Naomi lowered the phone with a calmness that felt almost divine. You both made a choice tonight, she said quietly. You chose humiliation over decency. And you chose it publicly. She stepped closer, the chandeliers catching the soft gleam of her dress as if bowing to her authority. Now, she continued, you get to live with the consequences publicly. The room did not breathe. Not when Eleanor stumbled backward into her chair. Not when Richard's hands shook uncontrollably. Not when Naomi Carter placed her phone back into her clutch with the finality of a closing vault. Tonight, the Kingsburys had picked the wrong woman to embarrass. And Naomi had only just begun. The Ritz ballroom no longer sounded like a gala. It sounded like a fault line splitting. At first, the shift was subtle, the hush of whispers dying, the orchestra trailing off mid-measure, the mechanical hum of the chandeliers filling the vacuum left by vanished music. Then came the second shift, the doors at the back of the ballroom opening in two clean, simultaneous arcs. 12 individuals entered. Not security. Not hotel staff. Helios Meridian Legal. Their black suits moved like a single organism, precise, silent, terrifying in their symmetry. Guests parted instinctively, the way crowds move aside for oncoming ambulances even before they consciously register the sirens. Eleanor clutched the edge of the table. Richard, who are they? But Richard already knew. The color had drained from him long before the first attorney reached the center of the room. His lips parted, but no sound emerged. The lead attorney, a woman with steel-gray hair and rectangular glasses, opened a leather portfolio and spoke with the clarity of a judge delivering a verdict. Notice to Kingsbury conglomerate, she announced. By order of Helios Meridian Group, the following actions are effective immediately. Her voice echoed beneath the chandeliers like a gavel. Termination of the $7 billion merger agreement. Revocation of all funding lines pending review. Freezing of joint accounts and suspended credit privileges. Withdrawal from all scheduled sponsorships, including tonight's event. Gasps ruptured the room. Someone dropped a champagne flute, it shattered like punctuation. Eleanor clapped her hands over her ears. Stop reading that. Stop. But the attorney continued, unmoved, unstoppable. Furthermore, Helios is exercising its right to recall outstanding debts previously extended to Kingsbury conglomerate. Payment is due in full within 72 hours. What? Eleanor shrieked. You can't do that. The attorney looked at her for exactly 1 second. Helios can, she said calmly, and Helios has. Eleanor stumbled backward, hitting the back of her chair. Richard gripped the table, his knuckles bone-white, his breath shallow and ragged. Around them, guests watched with a cocktail of horror and fascination. Some recorded, others hid their phones, too frightened to be associated with the family now dissolving in real time. Naomi didn't move. She stood in stillness, a quiet axis around which the night now revolved. Power didn't radiate from her, it folded the room inward. The attorneys were the storm. She was its center. One of the attorneys turned to her. Ms. Carter, all actions have been executed as directed. Naomi nodded once. Thank you. Eleanor staggered forward, mascara trembling beneath her eyes. You did this. You ruined us. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Not cruel. Not triumphant. Eleanor, she said softly, I didn't ruin you. Her gaze swept across the collapsing dynasty. You did that yourselves. And with those words, the Kingsbury Empire began to fall, not with shouting, not with violence, but with the quiet precision of a woman they should never have underestimated. The collapse didn't begin with screams. It began with notifications. Before the attorneys even stepped aside, a ripple spread through the crowd, screens lighting up one by one, faces blanching as the first alerts hit the financial district like aftershocks. Helios Meridian terminates $7 billion Kingsbury deal. Kingsbury stock halted amid liquidity fears. Source: massive credit freeze underway. Gasps erupted around the ballroom, sharper than breaking glass. Executives swore under their breath. Donors scrambled for signal. Cameras turned, no longer on Naomi, but on the Kingsburys, whose legacy was evaporating in real time beneath the chandeliers they'd once used to blind others with their wealth. Richard's phone buzzed violently in his trembling hand. He answered on instinct. Richard, a panicked voice shouted through the speaker, the board wants emergency action, liquidity is gone, we can't pay vendors, banks are calling. Richard couldn't speak. He could barely breathe. Eleanor snatched the phone. Fix it, she screamed. Fix it right now. But the voice on the other end only grew more frantic. Helios was the bailout. Without them, we're finished. The phone slipped from Eleanor's fingers and clattered to the floor. Around the ballroom, chaos unfolded with the elegance of disaster. A senator quietly excused himself through a side door, unwilling to be photographed with a sinking dynasty. A tech founder whispered, "Pull our foundation partnership, now." Socialites who once clung to the Kingsbury's influence began edging away as if rot might spread by proximity. Eli, the waiter, watched the unraveling with wide eyes, not in joy, not in vengeance, but in awe. He had seen cruelty punished before, but never with this kind of precision. Never with this kind of silence. And through it all, Naomi remained still. A woman approached her carefully, respectfully. I didn't know who you were, she whispered. Naomi didn't look at her. You didn't need to. The woman swallowed. I'm sorry for not stepping in. Naomi's gaze remained forward, fixed on the trembling empire before her. Most people don't, she said quietly. That's why nights like this happen. The chandeliers flickered, catching the sheen of Eleanor's tears as she sank into her chair. Her entire world, status, power, illusion, was collapsing under the weight of a single truth. They had mocked the one person who could erase them. Another alert vibrated through the air. Kingsbury Foundation under review, sponsors pull support. Guests murmured, this is historic. She wiped them out, it's over. But Naomi didn't revel. She simply watched. Not with cruelty. With clarity. Because beneath the glittering ceilings of the Ritz, the room had finally learned what she'd known all along. Power doesn't shout. Power doesn't shove. Power doesn't need the room to recognize it. Power only needs a moment. And Naomi Carter had chosen hers. The ballroom was no longer a gala, it was a ruin wrapped in velvet and gold. What had begun as arrogance had ended in aftershocks that rattled every table, every donor list, every chandelier trembling above the wreckage of the Kingsbury name. But Naomi Carter wasn't finished. She stepped forward, each movement deliberate, as if measuring the weight of the moment before setting it down. Conversation stilled. Even the attorneys paused. Naomi reached the center of the ballroom where hours earlier, the Kingsburys had basked in applause and rested her fingertips lightly on the edge of the podium. Her touch silenced what little noise remained. I want to make something clear, she said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You have all witnessed the consequences of disrespect tonight. But this is not destruction for destruction's sake. Richard, hunched in his chair, looked up with trembling resentment. Eleanor squeezed her eyes shut, refusing to listen even as her world collapsed around her. Naomi continued, her gaze sweeping the room. Helios Meridian will be reallocating the $7 billion from the terminated Kingsbury transaction. Gasps rippled through the remaining guests. Phones rose again, not for scandal this time, but for history. Naomi's posture remained poised, unshaken. We will redirect those funds to initiatives that actually uplift communities. Affordable housing. Urban infrastructure. Education for underserved youth. Eli, the young waiter, felt his chest tighten as Naomi's eyes briefly found his. Not recognition of service, but recognition of potential. And beginning tonight, she added, Helios will fully sponsor a new program for the hospitality workers who make nights like this possible but are too often ignored. People turned toward the staff, servers, bartenders, coat attendants, suddenly realizing they existed. Eleanor pushed herself upright, voice cracking. You can't take our money and give it to them. Naomi regarded her with a calm that felt like judgment carved in stone. I'm not taking your money, she replied. I'm taking back mine. The room vibrated with murmurs, some shocked, some approving, some awestruck. Naomi continued, her tone softening but not weakening. Power means nothing if it isn't used to lift someone. Eli felt the words land like a hand on his shoulder. Naomi stepped away from the podium, her presence radiating a quiet command that pulled focus like gravity. To every person in this room who watched what happened earlier, her gaze moved slowly, deliberately. Know this, silence is a choice. And so is dignity. A man near the back bowed his head, shame creeping into his posture. Before Naomi turned away, she spoke one final line, light as breath, heavy as truth. Tonight wasn't about a deal. It was about a lesson. The chandeliers flickered once more, as if nodding in agreement. And beneath their trembling light, Naomi Carter walked past the ruins of a dynasty. Not as their executioner, but as the architect of a world that would rise from their collapse. By the time the chandeliers dimmed for the final time that night, the Kingsbury name had already begun its descent. Before dawn, every major financial outlet carried the same headline: Kingsbury Empire implodes after Ritz-Gala incident. $7 billion deal terminated, assets frozen, legacy in freefall. The world woke to their humiliation. But inside Naomi Carter's penthouse office, walls of glass overlooking a city still blinking into morning, there was only silence. The kind earned after a night of choosing justice over appeasement. She stood alone, watching the first line of gold rise across the skyline. Power didn't exhilarate her. It rarely did. But clarity? Clarity always felt right. Her phone buzzed once on the desk. A message from Lillian, her legal chief. Kingsbury bankruptcy expected within 48 hours. All Helios reallocations underway. Another buzz, this time from Eli. He had hesitated before sending it, typing and deleting 10 times until he found the courage to keep it simple. My sister got the full confirmation letter. Thank you. For everything. Naomi exhaled, slow, quiet, a release rather than a victory. She typed back. Tell her to use it well. Her future is hers now. Down in the city, Kingsbury offices were already swarmed with press. Employees streamed out carrying boxes. Executives hid behind tinted cars. The same dynasty that once towered over boardrooms now crumbled under its own arrogance. But Naomi did not linger on them. Their fall was a consequence. Her mission was elsewhere. A soft knock sounded. Her chief of staff stepped in. The foundation directors are ready when you are. They want to discuss allocation timelines for the new community initiatives. Naomi nodded. Tell them I'll come down in 5 minutes. As the door closed again, she returned her attention to the sky, its light spilling across the glass like a promise. She thought of the ballroom. The tables of gold and marble. The guests who watched in silence. The woman who believed cruelty was a crown. And the moment everything shifted because one person refused to bow. There was no pleasure in their downfall. Only certainty. Certainty that nights like that, moments like that, shaped the world more than any contract or boardroom ever could. She stepped away from the window, heels quiet against polished stone. Some empires fall from greed. Some from mismanagement. And some, like the Kingsburys, fall because they attack the wrong woman in public. At the elevator, she paused just long enough to let the weight of the night settle, not as triumph but as truth. Dignity isn't an accessory. It isn't negotiable. It isn't something granted by the wealthy or revoked by their whims. It is a force. And when dignity stands its ground, the world moves out of its way. Naomi pressed the elevator button. The doors slid open. A new day waited. And behind her, the ruins of a dynasty whispered the same lesson over and over. Never mistake silence for weakness. Sometimes, it's the sound before the world changes.